Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Behnam Ben Taleblu, senior fellow at the FDD. Behnam, thank you so much for joining me once again.
Pleasure. Great to be with you.
We are really in a critical moment right now. Tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate after a leader of Hamas and a leader of Hezbollah were both killed within the past 2 weeks. Now the world is waiting to see how Iran is going to respond. So can you talk about the moment we're in right now?
Sure. Well, this is a moment brought to you by multiple cycles of violence and escalation in the region. But make no mistake, since October 7th, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been orchestrating something of a multi-front war against Israel and being able to really orchestrate that multi-front conflict essentially on the cheap or nearly for free. Right now, we're in a historic moment because we're about to see potentially the second overt, direct, and kinetic use of force by the Islamic Republic against Israel. Earlier during this conflict, on April 13th, April 14th, Iran launched a gigantic barrage of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and one-way attack drones at Israel in response to an attack, killing several of its uniformed service persons in Damascus, Syria, in a building that they alleged was the consulate. Israel responded militarily, but did not publicly claim the attack. And I think the Islamic Republic, having had a member of the Axis of Resistance, Ismail Haniyeh, the political chief of its Hamas, recently killed on Iranian territory, reeling from embarrassment, is looking to do essentially what the Iranian hardline media has been saying, which is to engage in bloodlust. And in essence, now we're in a moment of when another overt, direct, and kinetic attack from Iran is going to be a matter of when and not if.
I know you're saying it's going to be a matter of when and not if, but is there any indication of what that response would look like? We remember the drone attack back in April. Would it look like that? Would it be escalatory from April to now? I mean, tell us what we know.
There's a couple different ways the Iranians could change this. One is volume. They could simply fire more. Another is quantity. They could fire more capable systems. For example, of the three different types of ballistic missiles they fired, there were about 100 ballistic missiles fired. About 50% of them failed before launch or before even arriving at the target. So they weren't even intercepted. They may be able to fire a more militarily capable projectile, or one that requires less preparation time for launch, one with greater military utility, one that could potentially evade some radars, as they allege. So there's a whole universe of different munitions that the regime could use as well. But paying attention to how the Iranian media has been talking about this, you're likely to see a layered attack, and not just layered directly from Iran, but layered from different proxy forces that the regime has either created or co-opted in this region. And what has been said in the Iranian media is that there's the potential for a 360-degree attack, meaning an attack from the north of Israel or from the south of Israel at the same time, or from the east and the west at the same time. And what the regime is looking to do here is either from its own territory or from the territory of its proxies to really be able to try to penetrate that integrated air and missile defense architecture that both Israel has, as well as that which the U.S. has been able to bring to bear. So the regime could change the type of weapon, the number of weapon, the layered nature of the attack, as well as the jurisdiction they're launched from.
Would a 360-degree attack mean that there would be a full-scale Middle East war? I know there are concerns of that, but do you think that those concerns are valid?
I really do believe those concerns are valid. This is not the talk of a wider war that we heard in October or November of last year. This is essentially the Islamic Republic being buoyed to move out from the shadows and enter really this public overt area and flex its muscles. So in a sense, when they're promising more proxy attacks, they mean it. You've had, for instance, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen fire a drone, an Iranian-made drone, 2,600 kilometers, the longest flight time, or the longest flight record for an Iranian drone in history thus far, attack Israel from the west. So basically be able to target Tel Aviv recently by coming over the Mediterranean and going at civilians in Tel Aviv, basically by flying over a beach. You've had children killed in northern Israel simply by artillery fire from Lebanese Hezbollah. So there is the track record there for real damage done that, when responded to, significantly raises the chances of a wider war. And enter into this destabilizing but dynamic situation the U.S. force architecture. The U.S. has moved at least 4,000 additional forces, different squadrons of fighters, moved to bolster the U.S. force presence with the carrier, and as you know now, most recently, a nuclear-powered submarine that had Tomahawk cruise missiles as well. All of this stuff is headed to the region or is in the region as we speak, and all of this is designed to play a deterrent role for the Iranians. But if you're the Islamic Republic, you may be banking on Washington not punishing the regime, but merely trying to create an architecture that denies the regime or intercepts the regime's projectiles rather than responding after an attack occurs.
What do you make of the United States' response? Because, like you said, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin sent the submarine as well as the carrier strike group over to the region. So what do you think about that?
You know, military repositioning is critical. The only problem is the value of this military repositioning is very much in the eyes of the beholder. What may have been a threat to the Islamic Republic a decade ago or a deterrent a decade ago may be more of an inducement today. The Islamic Republic does not doubt, for example, that America can easily outgun it, or it does not doubt the military imbalance between itself and America or itself and Israel. What it is banking on here is the resolve, the political will to use that force. And by increasingly moving more into the hybrid warfare and increasingly even the conventional military space, Tehran is hoping to inch its way into this area and prevent the other side from engaging in the use of force. So I think Tehran is guessing still, and I would hope that they guess wrongly, that Washington does not have the will to actually punish or respond, or that the Israelis may not overtly punish or respond to a strike, but rather merely intercept and step away.
What do you think Israel's response is going to be? Because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly said last week that Israel's both ready defensively as well as offensively. So is there a chance that Israel, if provoked by Iran through a retaliation, would then respond to that?
Well, given that last time the Israelis did respond militarily, it means that essentially, yes, it's a non-zero chance that they too again would respond militarily. But how and with what kind of weaponry and against what kind of target, and perhaps for escalation purposes, with what level of publicity or attribution would the Israelis engage in this response, and what impact might that have on America and the U.S. willingness to either get involved or to back away from the table altogether? Just as a reminder, the Israelis still have not claimed what many believed was their assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. So the Israelis still understand the importance of overt and attributable versus covert and indirect attacks against the Islamic Republic and its terror network. But ultimately here, the real X factor driving how and where and why and with what Israel will respond depends on the nature of the Iranian strike, both how successful it is, how lethal some of the projectiles may be, the potential measure of death or destruction after, as well as the relationship between the U.S. and Israel following that strike.
I want to talk about where this leaves a peace negotiation, because what we're talking about right now, I mean, you used the phrase 360-degree attack. That doesn't sound like peace. I know that Hamas said they will not be attending ceasefire talks later this week. So can we expect a peace deal anytime soon?
Listen, I think, never put it past some talented politicians of the region to be able to pull a rabbit out of a hat. But at this time, I have to say, after the Qatar and Egypt and Israeli and U.S. initiatives, having basically run into a brick wall vis-a-vis the Hamas pushback that you just mentioned, in the very short term, I think a major ceasefire agreement is unlikely. But if the Iranians actually look to try to dangle the use of force to push a ceasefire agreement that is not favorable for the U.S. or for the Israelis, then that could be a fundamentally different proposition. But right now, I have to say, Tehran is looking to strike before some kind of an agreement and its contours could change. But right now, Hamas is the one pushing away from the table on said ceasefire talks.
At the beginning of this conversation, you said it's not a question of if, but a question of when Iran will respond. Between now and that response, what particularly are you looking out for?
Well, I'm looking to see more of what the U.S. is already doing in the region, which is the military-to-military coordination vis-a-vis the Israelis, but potentially also the engagement of many of America's Arab partners in the region. It's critical to have them on board, either publicly or privately, to make sure they're part of this larger intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance mission to detect and track and intercept and destroy some of these Iranian projectiles that would be crossing their territory in the event of an attack. But it's also critical to make sure that military to military, the U.S. and the Israelis are seeing the same threat picture, that same 360-degree threat with the same kind of level of intelligence. So it's a warming sign, for example, that the CENTCOM chief, General Kurilla, has twice thus far gone to Israel. I think coordination really here is key. But there's one other thing besides coordination, because that's defense. It's how do you play offense? Have you been able to deter the Islamic Republic? Have you been able to signal a credible military threat against the Islamic Republic? Have you been able to get Tehran to back down? We are precisely in the position we are in because Tehran is not deterred. It's not deterred by Israel. It's not deterred by the United States. And in essence, it feels that to bolster its own deterrence, it has to flex its muscles and fire missiles and cause instability. And that is leading this larger boom and bust cycle of escalation in the region.
To your point, then, how does the United States, in the situation that we're in, which is quite precarious, how does the U.S. become on the offense opposed to what you're saying on the defense?
Well, there's some news, for example. There's a couple of stories that have said that the U.S. has either directly or indirectly tried to pass on this deterrent message, for lack of a better word, if you can copy paste from President Biden, this don't message to the Iranians to not engage in this attack, to get them to back down. But I think working through intermediaries and back channels has a time and a place, but right now may not be that time and a place. Right now is the time to signal resolve. And when you have a response ratio that exists in the region, 172, 173 different times since October 7th, U.S. forces in the region have been struck by Iran-backed militias, and the U.S. responds only a handful of times, perhaps 10, 11 times. And that's the stuff that underwrites that cycle of violence. So really evening out that response ratio is going to be key. Sometimes you need not go into Iran. You can signal resolve directly against Iran-backed assets in Iraq and Syria. The lack of an ability to do that and the lack of political will and attention towards doing that may have also been what got us into this situation. That plus, I would say, the needless political distance that existed between the U.S. and the Israelis following a couple of months after October 7th.
As we know, this situation is developing by the hour, so I hope as it does, you come back on and join me. Thank you so much again for coming on for the conversation.
My pleasure. I will.